Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first webinar of 1008 Creations. I am Michaela. I am so excited for today. You guys have no idea. I have been thinking about this for so long, and I'm just so very excited and so ready for today. And I'm just so excited. So before we get started, I want to actually give you some ground rules, okay? What we're going to do today, how we are going to operate today. So, number one, if you are not in a place to be cozy, if you are running around, you are trying to listen in, and you are not fully here, I want you to pause this and go finish what you're doing and come back when you can feel more at peace, more at rest, and are more cozy. Because the last thing that I want is for you to miss out on what you need to hear today. I also don't want you to miss out on just having a time of relaxation. We're just talking, we're chatting, and we're being cozy. So I literally have my coffee here in my Christmas mug here because why not? Sorry for those of you who don't start celebrating Christmas until after Thanksgiving. We're close enough, okay? We're close enough. So I'm going to take a sip of this. And the second rule is that we're going to be kind. We're going to be kind to everybody. We're going to be kind to me. I'm going to be kind to you. I don't tolerate rudeness, meanness, anything. So we're going to be kind to everybody. And I think that's it. Just be cozy and be kind. That's what it is today. Okay. I'm so excited. We're going to go ahead and get started. This will be replayable for everybody because it's here on YouTube. It's going to go into a playlist where we can just have all the fun stuff. Okay. I'm so excited. Okay. So welcome to Get Your Show Together. This is the webinar for growth on your podcast. So I'm extremely excited. I can't wait to show you some stuff, go behind the scenes a little bit, talk about how we're going to grow your show, and it's going to be fun and it's going to be amazing. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Who am I? Who is Michaela? You probably, if you don't listen to Cozy and Thriving, you probably have never seen my face before. And that's okay. Totally, that's fine. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. We're going to talk about some podcast plateaus. We're going to talk about what actually will work in your podcast, what I have found to work in my podcast, and then how you can apply these to yourself and how you can actually grow yourself. And then we're going to talk about how I can help assist you in that way. Okay. So number one, who is Michaela? I am Michaela, y'all. I am a wife. I am a dog mom. I am all of the things. But if I had to tell you in 5 sentences who I am and what I love, this is how I would say it. Hi, my name is Michaela. I absolutely love Jesus. I absolutely love my husband. I love to podcast. I am introverted, and my favorite thing on earth is to be cozy. So fall is my favorite season. That is how I'd introduce myself to anybody. But to give you a little bit of backstory on how I got here, I guess, how I got to podcasting and being a content creator. In 2021, I had been an introverted girl my entire life. I never wanted to be the center of attention. I did not like the sound of my own voice, and I could care less if I was on camera. I literally was a photographer, meaning I was behind the camera on purpose. I did not want to be the center of attention. So in 2021, I actually started a press-on nail business, which if you guys saw at the beginning and kind of in this bottom little corner here, I have my nails done. These aren't press-ons, but I started a press-on nail business because I've always loved nails. I've always loved the art and everything with that. And so I started that business, and my account, my Instagram account for that was going to be faceless. It was going to be just my nails. It was just going to be for business. And I was okay with that. But then at some point it flipped, and I was like, no, I don't want it to just be my nails in a portfolio. I want people to connect with their artist. I want people to connect with the person who is making their nails. So I started doing more content and more behind the scenes. I started doing trends and sharing my personality and what I believed about nails and all of these things. Like, that is how I started in content. And in 2023, I think, is when I started my very first solo podcast, which was Cozy Girl Fancy Nails. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot. This podcast is actually still available for you to listen to on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, which is kind of crazy because that podcast was, what's the word? How do I want to say? That podcast was my first one. So I definitely was awkward, nervous, weird. Like, it was just kind of cringy when I go back and listen to it, but I was like, this is my first, it's my baby, and I want it to still be shown. I want people to see where it came from. And the information was good, I thought. Maybe it wasn't, but I thought it was good. So yeah, that is how I got into podcasting. At the end of 2024, I actually closed that podcast down. I got into, I think, 37 episodes, and I was like, I think I'm done with the nail world completely. I still do my own nails. I don't have a press-on business anymore. I don't do the nail podcast anymore, but I have just evolved into who I am. And I am thankful for that business. I'm thankful for everything that I learned in that, because it led me to here and now we are in 2025. Okay. And 2025, this is the lineup of my podcast. It went through name changes. It went through cover changes. It went through content changes. When I first started this podcast at the beginning of the year, called Another Cozy Morning, it actually was supposed to be mostly on YouTube, and it was going to be more of like a news-ish show where I would just be talking about cozy things. One of the big things was that the Switch 2 was coming out, and I love Animal Crossing, and I love, cozy gaming, Mario, things like that, things where I can just be cozy. Literally, if you didn't know me at all and you just stumbled across this webinar, you have learned that my favorite thing on earth is to be cozy by now. I hope that you have. But yeah, even my nail podcast had cozy in it. So that should tell you something. But I wanted it to be this show of just like cozy news of like the Switch coming out, then like, books coming out, hobbies that we could do, all the things. And while I did do some of those episodes, I really started talking about the importance of just like structuring your life to make sure that you are actually living your life and not just working your life, not just going through the motions of life, but that you're actually enjoying every single moment of your life, and that you're romanticizing every moment of your life and being cozy every single moment of your life. So once I realized that this Another Cozy Morning podcast cover looked like I threw it together while I was sleeping, I moved on. I did this whole little photo shoot with myself, and I kept Another Cozy Morning, but changed the cover image. And then I moved to Cozy Girls Club, which has a special place in my heart because I still truly believe everybody who listens to Cozy and Thriving Now is still a part of this Cozy Girls Club. But I actually started a merch line with the Cozy Girls Club. And so that's why that one's so special to me. But yeah, so this is like everything that my podcast went through this year trying to get here. So I only grew my podcast 26 followers mainly because I couldn't stay consistent. I could not stay consistent. So now here is my podcast. This is Cozy and Thriving, the Future You podcast, the podcast where we learn to build a life that we actually want to be present for. I am absolutely obsessed with my podcast. And I feel like everybody who has a podcast should be obsessed with their podcast. They should be over the moon excited to talk about it. This podcast is actually the first one that I have felt like I could legit, one, call myself a podcaster, but also be proud of the podcast that I have. I actually was at a wedding that I didn't know anybody at, and I was sitting at the table with a bunch of people that I didn't know, and we got into a conversation of like what everybody did and all of these things, and the fact that I was able to say I'm a podcaster and people were actually like interested in hearing what I had to say and then going and following the podcast was absolutely insane. Coolest experience of my life, to be honest. But yeah, I'm obsessed and I think that you should be too. And we're going to make sure that you are by the end of this webinar. So enough about me. Let's talk about why do most podcasts plateau. Personally, I feel like you could be focused on the wrong things. And I don't know if these are necessarily myths, but I'm going to call them myths because I don't think that they are necessarily true. But myth number one is that you have to post more. I think that a lot of podcasts plateau because they start posting more. They feel like they need to post more. They feel like they have to do all of these, extra videos and extra clips and extra this, extra that to grow their podcasts. And I did not switch up my podcast one bit at all, like the posting schedule. The only thing that I changed posting wise was the day that I posted. So maybe I started posting on Mondays, then Wednesdays, maybe I did Friday, and now my podcast is on Sundays. But by 2026, I think I actually am going to move it back to Monday, just because I want to be able to respond to everyone right away. I think that's important when you have a podcast to be able to go under your episodes, and when people are commenting or people are messaging you and people are doing things with your podcast, that it's important to be as engaging as possible, like engaging back as soon as possible. So they just feel like they're actually talking to somebody and not just a brick wall. But I'm usually not on my phone at all on Sundays, so that's why I want to change it. That is myth number one. Myth number two is that you need guests to grow. Now, I understand that there are interview podcasts, there are interview style podcasts where that is literally your show. It is interviewing people. But if your goal for your podcast to grow is to have guests, like if having guests on your podcast is what you are doing to make your podcast grow, that's a better way to say it. I don't think that you're doing your podcast a service, because I truly believe that people should come to your podcast for you first, and your guest is the cherry on top. You should have an audience outside of the guest that you're bringing on. So that's just a personal thing, but I haven't had a guest on my podcast since, well, actually ever. I had a couple podcast guests on my nail podcast, but on Cozy and Thriving, none. So you don't need podcasts to grow. You don't need, what? You don't need a guest to grow. Myth number three is that you don't need fancier equipment. Or no, the myth is that you need fancier equipment, but you don't actually need fancier equipment. If I had to recommend one thing to get for your podcast, it would be a good mic. Podcasts they were started as audio. So the thing that you should be focused on the most with your podcast is your audio. The camera, cool, it's great. The look of your podcast, the background of your podcast, yes, that's amazing. We should want to have good backgrounds and good sets and all of these things. But the main thing, the main focus that you want to put into your podcast is a mic. And so if I was to recommend any mic, it'd be the mic that I'm holding right now and talking to you through. But you can also see it here in this picture on the left side. It is the Samson Q2U mic. And what I love about this mic is that I can plug it in. It comes with a USB end, so you can plug it into your computer. I have a little piece that makes it USB-C. So I actually recorded a podcast episode on my phone by plugging the mic directly into my phone and recording the video. So I recorded video and audio straight from my phone, and it worked. It was beautiful. It was great. So you don't need fancier equipment at all. I would just focus on making sure that your audio is good, audio is clean. And this mic that I have, I got for $68 because I bought it like the used, like new off of Amazon. They have like their they're not borrowed, their what's the word? I guess it's just used section. You can get it used, but the mic itself is $99. It retails for $99. So it's not expensive at all. It grows with you. It has the XLR cable as well. So if you do have that, you can use that. But I am an advocate for this mic, and I don't think that I need to get another mic. To be completely honest with you, I don't think that I would ever really necessarily need to get another mic. So that's just me. So now that we know that these are lies, we are going to talk about what actually works. So for me, what I would suggest to you and what I would say is going to help grow your podcast is clarity and connection. The clarity and connection is what's going to actually help grow your podcast, not the chaos and content overload. So like I was talking about at the beginning, where I was in the Another Cozy Morning era, then I went to the Cozy Girls Club era and didn't really know what my podcast art cover should be and all these things. It was just an unclear vibe. There was an unclear audience. And to be honest, what is happening? There was just there was no like through line. There was no, this is what Michaela's talking about. And so it wasn't until I gave my show a clear direction and structure that the growth naturally grew. So what actually is going to work for you in your podcast? And the first thing is direction. And when I say direction, I mean a series. I am an advocate for series. I love a good series. I love when people can follow from a series. There have been so many podcasts that I found because I was looking for something specific. I wanted to hear something specific and somebody was doing a series on it. And I actually ended up following them for the rest of my life, basically. And now I just listen to them as on a regular basis. So I want to tell you the story about the Future You Project. The Future You Project is very near and dear to my heart, but I made the Future You Project actually for myself because I wanted to begin to envision a life that I actually wanted to live. I wanted to envision what my future self could be living. I wanted to envision the things that I could grow into. And I decided to take that and put it into my podcast. And it grew so much. It literally, I feel like kickstarted my podcast, which is why on the bottom of my podcast cover, I put the Future You Project the Future You Podcast, because so many people followed me from that. And still to this day, I still get comments on my TikTok that went with that series. And I still get follows from that TikTok. I still get people clicking on my link from bio from that TikTok to go to this specific podcast. What I believe grew my podcast was the quick 60 to 90-second spiel I did about a podcast episode, and at the end of it saying, if you want to know more, go here. Okay, so hold on. What is happening? This is the episode that I started.
Culture is literally sucking the life out of you. I'm Michaela, and I'm building a life that I actually want to be present for using what I call the Future You Project. This project is about saying no to hustle culture and yes to building a life that your future self will actually thank you for. However, we are not burning ourselves out doing it. We're starting by setting up a lifestyle that will help us build for our future selves and staying sane in the process. So I hope you guys are taking notes because I'm about to give you the tea. Step 1, you're going to...
Okay, so that is what kicked off and started the entire series. That particular video had 47,000 views, and it just led people not only to my TikTok but straight to my podcast as well. So having that direction of knowing exactly what to post on social media, if you are a social media person, and on your podcast, and correlating them is what's going to help grow your podcast. The biggest thing that I realized will help with this is that in the Future You project, I broke down everything from the blueprint to the habits to everything that you are going to do in that. And I broke them into different podcast episodes. So now my podcast audience also has direction in what they're doing, and I did it based on here's how you start and here's how you finish and here's how you follow through. And my podcast audience was able to follow that through, and it was also able to grow because I was clear on what I was talking about and I was clear on exactly what my podcast was. So once I did this, my next 3 standalone episodes blew up because the series built momentum. And the series is your direction, is going to help keep you on track, and you're not just going to have these random thoughts that people have to navigate through, because people truly do want to follow a journey. So if you have direction, your audience has direction, your podcast has direction, you will see growth. The next thing that actually works is your discovery. This is showing up with intention. So what do I mean by this? This means everything about my podcast has intentionality to it. When I was talking to you at the beginning about my covers and my show name, everything had to be intentional for me. And I realized everything needed to be intentional as I was going through those podcast changes. As I went from Another Cozy Morning to Cozy Girls Club to now Cozy and Thriving, each time I changed my name, it was because I was trying to align my name with my audience. I was trying to align who I was talking to with my podcast. So on top of my outward appearance of my podcast, I had to also, when people went into the podcast, what they were seeing. What were people going to actually notice when they went to the podcast? Was it going to be my cover, or was it going to be my podcast title? So I realized that my podcast titles had to stop looking like podcast titles, being like Episode 1, how to blank. Episode 2, how to blank. Episode 3, how to blank. And my podcast titles actually had to solve a problem. Why were people going to listen? Why were people going to be a part of the community and the club? So here I have my podcast on Spotify. My last podcast episode at the time of recording says we don't always feel like showing up, and that's okay. The reason that this title works is because people who are getting tired, are getting burnt out, are feeling a certain way, I don't want to show up today, are wanting to know and wanting to feel a part of a community of people who are like, okay, I'm going to sit down. I'm not going to continue to do what I'm doing. I'm not going to continue to push through. I don't feel like showing up, and I need to know that that's okay. And so when they see this title, they're like, oh my gosh, I've been feeling this, and I'm so glad that somebody said it. They're going to click on it, and they're going to listen to it and really understand what it means to not feel like showing up and what to do in the process of not wanting to feel like showing up. Okay, sorry, my camera died. But here is the beginning of my podcast. I put this is the biggest thing I've ever done for the winter of 2025. My very first episode, nobody cares that it was me. Nobody cares. Nobody knows who I am. It's whatever. This was my intro to another Cozy Morning podcast. So it was fun. It was a cool episode to do, but then the next one I put, you're going to stay motivated without burning out in 2025. This one was more you. It was about my audience. This one, you're going to simply master your time in 2025. This is exactly how. These were very much YouTube titles, and these episodes actually did way better on YouTube than they did on Spotify. So also just knowing that when people are looking for your podcast on Spotify and YouTube, it's like a different audience. These definitely are going to attract audience members on YouTube, but if your goal is to grow on Spotify or Apple, I would make it definitely more how I did it at the beginning, where it was like, it's okay. You're not going to feel like showing up. These also did good. These were right after my future you. So say no like you mean it. You don't have to be productive all year round. A business plan that supports you, not consumes you. Stop thinking so hard and just romanticize your life. This was also one that did really good. It's just playing to your audience's emotions, I feel like, is the best way to really, really capture your audience. Why did it do that? Okay, there we go. It was like so weird looking. Okay. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully seeing just like a little bit behind the scenes about my titling and everything helped. The next thing that I would say in discovery is also using short form content. So like I said, I use TikTok to help me grow my podcast. I made a signature series on TikTok called the Future You Project, while also sending people to my series on my podcast called the Future You Project, and people discovering me that way. It's not just a clip of what you're talking about, but actually interacting with the audience on TikTok as well. These can be very easy, or they could be very hard depending on how you do them. But what I did was basically take the key points that I made in my podcast, and I just wrote them out and put them onto a TikTok video. So I know that sounds easier said than done, but it definitely is one of probably my most, I would say, is the best marketing strategy that I did for my podcast, was to make 2 series, but say the same thing, but just make it so that way it fits that platform, if that makes sense to you. And the very last thing that I did was that I aligned my content with what people were searching for and feeling. Like I said, my podcast titles became more to what my audience was feeling, and not just being like, here's 10 ways to, or here's 10 things to do when you don't feel like showing up. Like, that doesn't play to my audience's feelings. It plays to my audience's like needs. But sometimes when people are going to a podcast, they're not looking for a step-by-step. They're looking for somebody to resonate with. And if I can't get you to grasp anything else out of this webinar, it would be that your audience wants to resonate with you. They don't want just a step-by-step. So after everything that I just said about discovery, the biggest thing to get from this is that discovery happens when your podcast feels relevant before your audience even presses play. In your visuals, in your titles, in your content strategy, all of that matters for your discovery before the actual content inside of that episode. All right. And lastly is the experience. So we have created a direction for our podcast. We know what we're talking about. We've created a series to kind of funnel people in and to create momentum in our podcast, not only for ourselves, but for our audience. We've created our discovery, quote unquote, package for our podcast where our visuals look good. So if you're doing thumbnails on YouTube, you have a good podcast cover, your titling is perfect, you are using social media to your benefit. And now we are at the experience, meaning this is what's actually inside of your podcast. This is what people are listening for. This is what people are watching. This is your editing and listener retention. This is the biggest thing to podcast growth because yes, having the followers and seeing the followers is amazing. But when your podcast is actually holding people's attention, that's when you really know that you're growing. So here is where I personally have seen the most growth in since the beginning of my podcast to now. The very first thing that I did was I stopped starting with welcome back. I know it's so easy to say, hi everybody, welcome back to Cozy and Thriving. I'm your host, Michaela, and this is a podcast where we learn to build a life without burning out or whatever. I literally messed up my own tagline, but that's okay. That is not what you want to start with because people don't know who you are. People don't know what this is about. People click on your podcast episode and then they'll hear a intro or they'll hear the same line over and over and over again. I feel like when you get to a certain place, this is for growth, okay? When you get to a certain place where you have an audience that's going to listen to you no matter what, I don't think that it matters as much how you start your podcast, but to grow your podcast, this is what I have found works. So I stopped starting with welcome back and I started with a hook. So when you click on my podcast, my music starts. If you watch, you're going to see it says 1008 original and for like 2 seconds, and then it's going to go immediately into what our podcast is about. So for instance, one of the things that I would say if I was talking about not showing up and my title said, we don't always feel like showing up and that's okay. When my podcast started, the very first thing that I would say, and I can't really remember what I said in that particular podcast episode, but I would say something along the lines of, so you don't feel like showing up today. I get it because I didn't feel like showing up today either. But today we're going to actually talk about what to do when we don't feel like this. I don't want you to lose your momentum. I don't want you to lose all the things that you have been working so hard for. Something along the lines of that. I don't remember what I said, but that was a good one. So if you start with that, if you start with a hook, you're immediately saying what your podcast is about. You're immediately talking about what is going to come in the rest of the episode, and you are immediately catching their attention. After you've captured their attention, that is where then I would say, hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cozy and Thriving, the podcast where we learn to build a life that we actually want to be present for. I'm your host, Michaela, and today I'm excited to yada, yada, yada. So that is where it would be. I personally still would put what your podcast is about in the middle because you are going to have new people listen and new people follow, and you do want them to know what your podcast is about. But to have anything over 30 seconds of you explaining what your podcast is, I think you're losing listeners. If you are starting your podcast or revamping your podcast or doing whatever, and you have this small little intro, I would actually make that like a 30-second like podcast teaser. If you have a YouTube channel, have that as the video that plays as soon as people go onto your channel, but I wouldn't have it on every single episode. I think that it's too long and it will lose your listeners. It will lose people staying, especially on YouTube or even on Spotify, where it starts to play the next episode right away and they hear music and then they hear talking about what a podcast is instead of like getting your attention. Let's take, for example, if one podcast episode ended, somebody was listening to one podcast and it ended, the music went out, and then all of a sudden they heard, "I know you don't feel like showing up today," and that's okay. That would grab their attention before they even had time to click off. So just keep that in mind. So I know that that was a long roundabout way of saying, hey, don't start your podcast with "welcome back," but it really does work. And starting with a hook. When I did this, I've noticed that my retention jumped above 60%, which signals to Spotify people are engaged. So that means that people are actually listening to my podcast all the way through. 60% of my audience is listening to my podcast over the halfway point, which is absolutely insane. It's actually signaling to Spotify that people are engaging with my podcast, and that only started after I stopped saying, "Hey, welcome back." It started when I started hitting them right off the gate. This is what the podcast episode is about. If you want to stay cool, if you don't, hop off. So I think that really helped because it started to narrow down the people that were listening to my podcast and the people that are actually wanting to stay. Now for the internal experience, the things that you're going to do for your podcast in terms of the technical side, which is editing. I stopped overly editing my podcast. I allowed pacing to be what it was. I am a slow talker. I pause a lot. If there is a longer pause than usual, then I'll cut it. But I want it to be an actual conversation. I want people to actually hear me talking the way that you're hearing me talk. I'm just kind of like rambling and explaining and making sure that you really get it, instead of just being like point 1, cut, point 2, cut, point 3, cut. When you don't overly edit your podcast, I think it makes it better. However, I do think that if you are rambling on way past the point, that people are going to get lost, just like you're getting lost in thought, so are other people. So you want to make sure that your pacing is good, your transitions are good, and your energy throughout your podcast is good, but you want to keep that through your editing. So your clean sound plus your intentional flow equals trust. It equals you're a good person to listen to, and trust equals growth. So a couple things that I want you to know about editing. Okay, so editing isn't about perfection. And I know that kind of sounds contradictory to what I just said, but editing is really about keeping your listener engaged. It's about a clear flow, balanced audio, and pacing that will feel natural to your audience and that will feel natural to your tone and to your podcast personality, I guess. And when that happens, you will start to see your audience staying to the end. They will begin to listen all the way through, and that's when the algorithm will push your podcast out. I know it's unfair that the more people that listen to you, the more they push, and not the other way around, but that's just how it works. Okay, so that is why I strive so hard to help creators focus on their message. My goal as a podcast editor is to help you focus on your message by helping you with the pacing, your clear flow, balancing your audio, making sure that your audience stays to the end, because your podcast is edited in the tone of voice that your podcast should be in, or the podcast personality that you were trying to have. So with that being said, I want to give you 20% off your first 4 podcast episodes. I will do this from now at the time of you listening to the end of Black Friday. So next Friday at 11:59 p.m. That's when this is going to end, and it's exclusively for my webinar listeners, my webinar viewers, the people that are here today, people that are listening today. So what I want you to do is email me. I'll put the email on the screen, write it down, or just listen, whatever it is. It is mbarnes@1008creations.com. Once you get my email, put in the subject, put the emoji, the mic emoji, and the white heart emoji. And then in your podcast or in your email, tell me what your podcast is about, who you are, everything, and then we can go from there. But I am so excited. I want to give that to you because I just want to give it to you. I truly thank every single one of you who are here listening to how I grew my podcast and like learning to grow yours too. And I want to help you grow your podcast beyond just this. So 20% off for anybody who is listening. But now we are going to apply all of what I just told you to your podcast now. So let's jump back in it. Okay. How you can apply this to your podcast today, okay? The very first thing that you can do is audit your podcast. Then you can simplify it. Then you can evaluate your experience. So what do I mean by auditing your show? You're going to give your show direction. So the first 3 things that you're going to ask yourself is, what does my cover look like? What does my podcast name mean, and is it fitting what I want to talk about on my podcast? And what series idea can I start with to start seeing more growth on my podcast? Those are the 3 things that you're going to ask to audit your stuff, okay? I also audit podcasts. So if you want to go a little bit deeper into this podcast audit, you can also email me again at 1008 creations. So all the links for podcast editing and the audit will be in the description of this podcast webinar. So just make sure to go down below and get all the things, okay? So if you want to take your audit to another level, I can help with that. Next is simplify your discovery funnel. So what I want you to do is pick one place to promote your podcast. For me, that was TikTok. It was just the easiest one to do at the time. I think now I would go back to Instagram if I were to do it over. But that's not for everybody. Some people like TikTok more than Instagram. Instagram's algorithm is a little harder to figure out. TikTok is a lot easier. So whatever you want to do, but just pick one place to promote. This could also be YouTube Shorts. But then you're also going to pick one goal per episode, and you're going to create a short form, quick 60 to 90 second rundown of what your podcast episode is about. And then you're going to post it on that platform. The reason I only say one place to promote is because I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed with cross posting from Instagram to TikTok to YouTube. Doing all of them is just way too much for me. So if you feel like you can do more than that, go for it. But personally, I say just pick one to promote, because that way you can actually create and make your video specific to that podcast platform. And then lastly is to evaluate your experience. This is also kind of going into that audit section, but you're really going to listen to your podcast and see, does your podcast sound and feel like you? When you go and listen to your podcast, are you obsessed with it? Are you like, yes, this sounds like me. Yes, this is exactly what I envisioned it to be. Yes, this is exactly what I need. Or are you feeling like, I'd rather this be switched up. I'd rather this be something else. This doesn't feel like me. Those are the things that you're going to do. So those are the 3 ways you're going to apply this to your podcast. So what I want you to do is actually start writing down 3 episode ideas that you can build into a series. Create a signature series starter. These are going to be things that can build on each other. So let's say you're in the fitness space and you are talking about how to build a fitness routine. You're going to talk about your nutrition. You're going to talk about what workouts are best for what. You're going to talk about time management, because those three things all need to go together. I've learned in my own fitness journey that those three things go together. But that's already, it could be a short signature series. So to wrap up this webinar, I want to just give you a couple of recap notes that you can take and just kind of think about and chew on for the day. The first one is that growth comes from direction and not more content. I don't want you to create a bunch more content. I want you to create something that has direction and that is going to help support your podcast, and not just putting something out for the sake of putting something out. Create direction for yourself, create a good basis for your podcast, and keep it moving. The second thing is that your listeners are going to stay for stories and not just random thoughts. They're going to stay for your input and your experiences and the value that you bring to a certain topic. Whether you are an entertainment podcast, whether you are a faith-based podcast, whether you are a self-help podcast, whatever the case is, your listeners are staying for the value and the stories that you bring. And the last one is that editing and clarity make your message thrive. When you have a clear message, when you have clear editing, and when you have a clear vision for how your podcast should look and run, that is when you're going to see growth. That is when you're going to see your podcast just have all the people listen to it. So ways that I can help you with all of this is by editing your podcast. I am a podcast editor. I have been editing for content creators all year round. That is my business. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love being able to be a part of a podcast and a part of a creator's journey. I love it so much. I also can help audit your podcast. So if you're like, Michaela, I have an editor, or I feel like my editing just needs to be audited, or I just don't know if my podcast is what I want it to be, or I don't know if my podcast has the qualities of growing, or whatever the case is, whatever it is, I can help with that as well by auditing your podcast. These are all services I offer at 1008 Creations. And like I said, I'm giving 20% off for my editing for the first 4 episodes that you have. So make sure that you are checking that out. You can also follow me at 1008 Creations on Instagram. I am growing my business platform over there. I don't know why I didn't start it at the beginning of the year, but I didn't. So now it is up and running at the end of 2025, but I'm so excited. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you have any more questions, I will be in the chat for a little bit. But other than that, you guys can DM me on Instagram. We can chat there as well. I'm so thankful for every single person who listened and had tuned in today. I just can't wait to see your podcast grow. And yeah, I love each and every one of you. Thank you guys so much for being here. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.